was just past 6 when the office lights began to dim, casting long shadows across the glass walls. Noah, always the last to leave, was halfway through closing his laptop when Victoria, the company's notoriously stern director, appeared at his desk. Her tone was calm, but firm. "Can you stay a little longer? I need to talk." That alone was enough to set off alarm bells. In a world where perfection was expected and reprimands were subtle yet swift, an after-hours talk felt like walking into the unknown. Still, he nodded, trying not to let the tension show.
Hello, I'm going to tell you this incredible story. Remember that to receive new stories like this, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell. Without further ado, let's get to the rest of the story.
The hours dragged on with a weight he hadn't felt in years, like waiting for a storm without knowing if you've left the windows open. Noah quietly ran through the emotional story of his past few weeks at work. Every project, every decision, replayed like a movie on fast forward. No missed deadlines, no complaints. Just a gnawing worry that maybe, just maybe, he'd made one mistake too small to notice, but big enough to cost him. The waiting itself was the punishment. When Victoria finally called him into her glass-walled office, the space felt unusually warm. There was no stack of reports on her desk, no charts or projections on the screen. Just her, sitting with a curious softness in her expression. "You've been doing incredible work," she said. Noah blinked. Compliments weren't her thing. Something felt off, or maybe different. Like this wasn't about numbers or strategy anymore. Like this was the beginning of one of those touching stories that people never expect to live through. She didn't stop at praise. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, folding her hands as if she were confessing rather than instructing. "Tell me about yourself, Noah. Outside these walls." That's when it hit him. This wasn't a review. It wasn't a warning. It was something far more disarming. There was a real story unfolding here, hidden between spreadsheets and silence. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for where it might lead. There was an awkward pause, not because the moment lacked words, but because it was so full of them. Noah shared bits and pieces, cautiously, still unsure of her intent. But the way she listened, without judgment or interruption, was unexpected. For a woman who moved through the office like a storm of precision and pressure, she suddenly seemed human. And that humanity made everything feel a little less predictable and a lot more personal. Victoria nodded at his answers with a faraway look, as if his life reminded her of something half forgotten. She asked about his family, his dreams, and even what music he liked, questions that had no place in the cold formality of corporate life. Her voice dropped in tone, almost wistful. Funny how we can know someone's work so well and nothing about who they are. It sounded like regret, and like something more, something about to unfold. As they wrapped up and he stepped into the elevator alone, Noah wasn't sure what had just happened. But the air felt different, like the first breeze before a shift in season. There was an emotional story beginning to write itself, and somehow he was at the center of it, whether he'd asked for it or not. And while nothing had happened yet, the door had quietly opened. 3 days later, just as the afternoon lull was settling in, Noah's inbox pinged with a subject line that stopped him cold. "Dinner." The sender? Victoria. No context. No formalities. Just a reservation time and the name of a sleek restaurant uptown. It didn't scream business. In fact, it barely whispered it. He stared at the screen, wondering if this was part of some elaborate evaluation, or if, somehow, it was something more. The real story of this invitation was still hidden between the lines. When he arrived, the place was softly lit, humming with quiet laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. Not the kind of spot for quarterly reviews or contract negotiations. And there she was, not in her usual monochrome armor, but in something softer. Her hair was down, her smile unguarded. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the candlelit table. It felt more like a scene from one of those emotional story moments people never forget, the kind you only recognize as important once they're behind you. Over the first glass of wine, Victoria began to speak, not with the clipped confidence of a boss, but like someone slowly shedding a weight she'd carried too long. Success can be loud, she said, but loneliness is quieter. Her words hung in the air. Noah wasn't sure how to respond. All he knew was that this wasn't a performance. It was a confession, the kind you only share when you're desperate to feel something real, something human. Noah asked a question, then another, each one pulling a thread that had been hidden beneath her polished exterior. Victoria told stories of her early days, of how she rose through the ranks by silencing every emotion that might slow her down. She laughed at old mistakes, sighed at missed chances, and then she said it, "There's something about you that feels familiar." It was disarming. It felt like a door swinging open in slow motion. They talked about things no performance review would ever touch. Childhood dreams, favorite books, the scent of rain after long dry weeks. With every passing moment, the structure between them seemed to dissolve. Noah found himself leaning in, not just physically, but emotionally. There was something magnetic in the way her eyes softened when she listened. This wasn't a business dinner. This was something else entirely. A touching story in the making, slowly unfolding in real time. At one point, Victoria paused, swirling the wine in her glass. "I'm not used to feeling seen," she admitted. And that's when it hit him. This woman, known for being unshakable, was trusting him with her vulnerability. It was rare, intimate, and it carried the kind of emotional gravity that lingers long after the lights go out. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew it meant something. As they walked out into the night, the city buzzed around them, unaware of the quiet shift that had just occurred. They didn't touch, they didn't kiss, but something far more powerful had taken root. The beginning of a bond built not on power or position, but on raw, unfiltered connection. Noah knew that whatever this was, it wasn't over yet. The real story was only getting started. The days that followed brought an odd silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but one filled with unspoken tension. At work, Victoria returned to her composed self, all crisp lines and careful words. But when they crossed paths, something lingered in the air. A glance that held just a beat too long, a hesitation in her voice. It was like being in the middle of an emotional story where neither character knew their next line. And yet, both knew the script had changed. It was a Thursday evening when they met again, by accident, or maybe not, outside a bookstore downtown. The awkward surprise gave way to easy conversation. They sat in a nearby cafe, just talking. But this time the mask stayed off. Victoria spoke freely, not as a superior, but as a woman who'd spent years building walls. "I used to be like you," she said softly, hungry for meaning, not just metrics. Her words carried a kind of ache only time can create. Noah listened, unsure if he was meant to speak or just absorb. Every sentence she shared felt like peeling back a layer. She talked about sacrifices made in the name of ambition, the relationships she let fade, the moments she missed. "You remind me of who I was before I became who I had to be," she said. And there was the kind of line that sits with you for days. It didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like truth. The conversation dipped into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that lives between people who trust each other. Eye contact lingered longer than before, filled with 100 questions neither dared ask. Was this connection real, or just an illusion brought on by long hours and loneliness? Noah felt torn. Part of him wanted to reach out, the other part feared what it might mean. Real story moments don't come with instructions. Victoria's hand brushed against his as she reached for her coffee. Neither of them moved away. That single moment, so subtle yet electric, made Noah realize they were walking a line far more fragile than any deadline they'd ever faced. Something was unfolding between them, delicate, raw, and wildly undefined. It wasn't just attraction. It was recognition, the kind that sneaks up on you. They laughed at something trivial, a shared distaste for weak coffee, or maybe an office joke, but the laughter was tinted with something deeper. There was warmth, yes, but also a shared sense of danger. They were no longer just colleagues. And the stakes weren't just professional. The emotional story between them had taken on a pulse of its own, one that refused to be ignored. As they left the cafe, Victoria hesitated before walking away. "This doesn't have to mean anything," she said, almost to herself. But Noah knew, and maybe she did too, that it already meant more than either of them wanted to admit. Their paths diverged for the night, but their stories were now undeniably intertwined. And the next chapter was already writing itself, just out of sight. The office felt colder than usual, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the invisible wall that had quietly risen between them. Victoria avoided his gaze in meetings. Emails were shorter. Conversations clipped. It was as if that night in the cafe had never happened. And yet, every glance they didn't exchange carried the weight of everything unsaid. Noah felt caught between logic and longing, the exact place where most emotional story arcs begin to unravel or evolve. Then, one evening, as the office slowly emptied out, she stood by his desk again. No email, no pretense, just her presence, steady and hesitant all at once. "We need to talk," she said. And this time, there was no confusion. Noah followed her to the conference room, his heart in his throat. She closed the door gently, her eyes searching his. "I can't pretend anymore." The line between manager and man blurred in that moment, beautifully, irreversibly. She spoke first, said it was foolish, unprofessional, even reckless, but also said it was real, that what she felt around him wasn't a distraction. It was a reminder that she was still alive beneath the suits and spreadsheets. Noah, finally unguarded, confessed the same. They both laughed at how ridiculous it was, and how impossible it had become to deny. This wasn't a game. It was a real story unfolding behind the scenes of their corporate lives. They made a choice that night, not to run from it, but not to throw it carelessly into the spotlight either. "Let's keep it between us," Victoria suggested. "Professional during the day. Whatever this was, whatever it would become, reserved for after hours." It wasn't ideal. It wasn't safe, but it felt honest. And for two people used to living behind facades, honesty felt like the most radical thing of all. The next few days tested them in ways they hadn't anticipated, pretending nothing had changed while everything had. Their meetings were surgical, their small talk minimal, but under the surface, an emotional current surged. A glance during a presentation, the subtle brushing of hands when passing papers. Every little interaction held a secret, a touching story being written in invisible ink. It was risky. One wrong move could collapse everything they built. But it was also thrilling, like living in a parallel world no one else could see. They became masters of the unspoken. Texts sent during breaks, shared playlists, short notes slipped between pages of reports. A romance that bloomed in whispers. The kind people rarely believe, unless they've lived it. Victoria, once the symbol of restraint, began to smile more, even laugh. And Noah, usually composed and distant, found himself anticipating the next after-hours moment with a heart that beat a little faster. They weren't just navigating office politics anymore. They were navigating something infinitely more delicate. And behind every door they closed, a new chapter was waiting. Their secret became a rhythm. A life lived in two parallel tracks, one under fluorescent lights, the other beneath the dim glow of street lamps and wine bars. They became experts at pretending, but their hearts never followed the rules. After hours, they'd meet in quiet places, never too close to work, always looking over their shoulders. But when they sat across from each other, the world softened. And that, more than anything, made the emotional story they were living feel sacred. There was something poetic about the way they existed between lines. Walks in the park after dark. Quiet dinners where conversations danced between philosophy and childhood dreams. Noah began to see sides of Victoria that no colleague ever would. Her vulnerability, her wit, her love for obscure French cinema. It felt like discovering hidden chapters of a book you thought you knew. This was no longer about secrecy. It was about intimacy. In the office, they became shadows of themselves. Always careful, always distant. A real story was unfolding behind the sharp clicks of keyboards and sterile boardroom agendas. No one suspected a thing, and somehow, that made it more special. They found freedom in their restraint. like a forbidden song humming beneath the noise of ordinary life. The kind of romance that doesn't need spectacle to be real. The lines between them blurred more each day, yet they held firm to their silent pact. Every stolen moment was cherished. A handwritten note tucked into a planner. A late-night message about nothing and everything. Noah began to feel like he was living a double life. But for once, both halves of him fell whole. The man at work and the man by her side were slowly becoming one. Victoria changed too. Her laugh came more easily. Her gaze softened during meetings. Though no one else knew, Noah could read every subtle shift. He noticed when she was tired, when she was sad, when something in a client's comment stung more than she let on. And she noticed him too. Knew when he was overthinking. Knew when to look at him just long enough to bring him back to earth. That kind of connection doesn't form overnight. It grows slowly, silently, like trust. There was a night when they sat on a rooftop, watching the lights of the city flicker like stars. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Victoria whispered, "I forgot how it feels to be wanted for who I am, not what I do." Noah didn't answer with words. He just took her hand. That moment, quiet, unremarkable to anyone else, became one of those touching stories that defines a lifetime. And so, their days continued, filled with deadlines and memos, with glances and silence. But beneath it all, something real thrived. A hidden love that didn't need the world's approval to exist. Just two people, bound by timing, restraint, and something neither of them expected. And every now and then, across the office floor, a glance would pass between them. No smile, no nod, just a knowing. The kind that says, "Yes, I see you, and I remember everything." So tell me, have you ever found yourself caught between what's right and what's real? Have you ever shared a glance, a silence, a moment, and just known that everything had changed, even if no one else could see it? Because sometimes, the most emotional story doesn't happen on a stage. It unfolds in the quiet spaces where no one's watching. So I'm asking you, would you risk it? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your story, your real story. Let's turn this comment section into a space where people connect, not just scroll. And hey, if this touched something in you, if it made you think twice about the masks we wear or the connections we hide, then give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell, because the next story might just be yours.